Welcome everyone to the Atlantic Theological Conference in the parish of Sackville. And a couple of housekeeping notes. Where is Father Petrie? There he is. Father, if you haven't registered, Father Stephen Petrie is the registrar and the bookseller. He wants all the books to go, so they're on the table in the narthex. So hot off the press. There you go. Today, I think. Also, the schedule, there is a printed schedule on the table. Every morning, we begin with the liturgy in the church. It will be Matins tomorrow, and then Matins and Mass at 8 o'clock each morning. Matins and Mass on Wednesday and Thursday, and Matins tomorrow with a continental breakfast here in the hall to follow. Tomorrow evening, the conference Eucharist, the High Mass, is at our remote location, our suburban point, St. Anne's in British Settlement, which is about 7 minutes away. And it's on Google Maps, but we'll also print up a little directional sheet for you. It is a drive away. And that begins at 5:30 with a dinner to follow in the hall. And I just need a show of hands as to how many people are going to be attending the dinner following the conference Eucharist. And I have my faithful warden and counter here to register that.
Thank you.
There'll be coffee and refreshments throughout the day, throughout the proceedings, in addition to breakfast. There's a sheet also on the registration table with a list of eateries and coffee shops within walking distance. So pick that up. The Wi-Fi password, which is too complicated to remember or give out orally, is printed on these little fluorescent sheets in two places and also at the registration table. And I think that's probably about it. Any questions or queries? If you do have any needs within reason, speak to me or to parishioners who are helping in the kitchen and in the setup. But welcome, and it's great to have you with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Father O'Brien. Welcome, everyone. Again, I won't re-welcome you too long, but welcome to the 2025 Atlantic Theological Conference. We're very pleased to have everyone here tonight, and I know so many from so many different places this year, which is great. And as we get just before we get going on our evening paper, I'd like to invite Will Barton to introduce our paper deliverer this evening.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Will Barton, part of the organizing committee for the conference, and I'm here to introduce our first paper speaker, who is Andrew Griffin. Andrew is a doctoral candidate in classics at Dalhousie University in Halifax, and is writing on Plato's understanding of doxa and its place in the philosophical or spiritual itinerary. Andrew has no less interest in late ancient and medieval philosophy and theology, and his MA was on the spiritual itinerary and its inclusion in the divine life in Anselm of Canterbury's Proslogion. Andrew has had the privilege of teaching classes at Dalhousie and volunteering for Burnside Humanities and Halifax Humanities. He's already presented this year at Plato conferences in Spain and elsewhere in the world, and when he's not thinking and reading and breathing and eating and sleeping Plato, he's hanging out occasionally with his wife and daughter in Lunenburg. So, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Will. And thank you to the organizers, to Father O'Brien and the parish of St. Paul's, and to all of you here. It is a true honor to be invited to speak at this year's Atlantic Theological Conference. The presenters at this conference over the past 4 decades have been my teachers and mentors, and I return frequently to the proceedings for constant nourishment. The topic of this year's conference returns to the heart of what has inspired it for so long: recollection, hope, and pilgrimage. I am an offspring of this community and the hope that has sustained it. My gratitude runs deep, and I cannot do it justice. I only pray that I do not do it an injustice. If only as a biographical note, I want to tell you what inspired this paper today, and some of you can explain it to me afterwards. The comment that inspired this paper came from Robert Krauss, Father Robert Krauss, in 1993, presenting at this conference on the topic of tradition and renewal. He writes, "Memory is the ground of our attention in the present and our expectation of the future. The concreteness and sanity of our present understanding and judgments will depend quite radically upon the clarity and the integrity of memory." Then he goes on to say, "Insofar as our criterion is experience, it will be only by bitter and devastating experience that we shall learn the limits and insufficiency of subjective freedom." Of that revolutionary criterion, I am likewise an offspring, for better or for worse. Allow me to begin. My paper is somewhat absurdly titled, "From Immediacy and Abstraction to Belief and Hope." Part 1. There is one hope that does not disappoint, for Plato, and that is the undivided good. The good is the cause of knowledge and truth, but other and more beautiful than they. The good is the cause of being, yet not being, but superior to it in rank and power. Also, the form of the good is knowable. It is known in Philebus, a dialogue, in the conjunction of beauty, proportion, and truth. What's more, every soul pursues the good and does its utmost for its sake. But, Plato continues, the soul is perplexed and cannot adequately grasp what it is, that is, what the good is, or acquire the sort of stable beliefs it has about other things. The soul is unfailingly moved by the good, but from it we have fallen. It remains known, it remains loved, but dividedly. The student of classical literature knows the many forms these divisions take in Plato's time. Let us take Theogony's myth, the story of the Gigantomachy, a battle between the gods and the giants, in which the rational Olympian gods and the chthonic, earthborn children of these gods wage war for a decade. A resolution following their great war requires that they all receive a place within a single cosmos. And this order is what Zeus establishes when he allots to each of the divided elements and opposed gods their proper sphere of authority. Now, humanity is not the principal interest here, but rather the gods and fate. Where humans are at the center of the action, it is these same divisions, or spheres of authority, coming into conflict that reveal human finitude and its ground. In Sophocles' Antigone, the conflict is between the spheres of the oikos and the polis, between blood relations and duties as a citizen. There, the family and the city constitute two distinct and true spheres of relating to the good and participating in reality. Now, Plato recognized in a new way the need to look beyond the divisions, those plaguing the city and the soul, to an undivided ground, the good. And his time required it. He lived in the wake of Athens' defeat by Sparta, the rise and fall of the 30 tyrants, the execution of his teacher Socrates by the restored democracy. Thucydides' reports of the Peloponnesian War that Plato lived through. Immediate pleasure and any means profitable to that end became the new honor and new value. No fear of God or of human laws was any constraint. Measure and restraint were treated with suspicion above all, whereas excess and violence were praised. Plato's project is one of recovery, of leading us back to ourselves, which means back to our principle and source. He draws inspiration not only from the poets and the playwrights, and with this Greek religion, but also from the demands placed on thought by the natural scientists, by Parmenides championing the law of non-contradiction, by Heraclitus recognizing the flux we live in, not to mention the sophists, whom he sees as having a deeply destabilizing effect on his world. Now, I'm going to take as my point of departure one particular division or opposition, which for our purposes will stand in for all these others. I've chosen this opposition because it holds a privileged place at the beginning of Plato's philosophical or spiritual itinerary, and at the farthest remove from the undivided good that is our end and source. In the Dialogue Republic, I'll tell us what it is in a minute. In the Dialogue Republic, Plato provides two corresponding images of this itinerary, a lion in a cave, and we know the image well. There are prisoners at the bottom of a cave, chained and able to see only the passing shadows of real objects projected on the cave wall in front of them by the light of the fire above and beyond them. The mouth of the cave marks the division between the visible world and the invisible. Spiritual, the invisible, spiritual, and truly knowable world that is outside the cave. The sun in that image corresponds to the undivided good from which we have fallen into the bottom of the cave, where the division I want to consider is at its most acute. This division is between what we may call immediacy on the one hand and abstraction on the other. These are the subjects of the first two parts of my paper. To say that this is a division in us and in our spiritual lives is to say that at the bottom of the cave we are divided between these two ways of relating to what we know and love. So on one side of the division, there is immediacy, that immediate and total togetherness of knower and known, or lover and beloved. On the other side, not knowing truly what that immediacy is, the world of thought and reason become empty abstractions whose reality is little more than a shadow. So these are our two sides, the division with which we begin at the bottom of the cave, the immediacy of experience and the thinking which in relation to it appears merely an abstraction. The immediacy of experience is at once that most surface level way of knowing which belongs to the nature of an appearance. And it's also something, we shall see, that is total and deeply compelling. Plato will portray the sophist Protagoras, and in a sense, the educational state, the state of education in Athens more broadly, as jumping back and forth between the immediacy of experience on one hand and the abstract thinking on the other. For Protagoras, to remain the measure of what is, and that is to make the human the measure, and to maintain that subjective freedom, which we claim as our own, Protagoras has to keep these divided elements separate and neglect the truth that each exists only in its dependence on the other. And what he staunchly avoids, Plato seeks to overcome: the abstraction or the abstract separation of experience and thought. We will have to be careful about just what these abstractions are, because for Plato, there is not an individual standing over and against the world, thinking up notions or hypotheses which have no bearing on reality. There is, on the contrary, a deep correspondence of human thinking, the natural world, and intelligible realities. The abstractions I'm going to be talking about are empty only in the sense that they are taken to be derivative or a function of that most surface level kind of knowing which is immediate experience. In the latter third of this paper, I want to see how Plato points us beyond this division and where it leads us. For Plato, the divided aspects of ourselves and the city are increasingly integrated as the spiritual journey progresses. Plato maps out for us the stages of our inner life, of our spiritual journey. Beyond the opposition of immediacy and abstraction, experience and thought, the first level at which a concrete integration of these divided elements is sought is in terms of belief, also called opinion for Plato. Belief in some ways prefigures knowledge or dialectic, which is the philosopher's way of knowing. But I want to restrict myself to belief, which resides in the soul, or better, is a state of the soul. Belief is not, first of all, a set of propositions or doctrines. In fact, a belief is more often than not held unknowingly, and in every case, the principle and source of what is true in belief is unknown. In belief, for Plato, the undivided good is known only dividedly. To move beyond the division of immediacy and abstraction is a matter of moving beyond sophistry. The sophist Protagoras will claim to possess the true and highest standpoint on reality. He says, man is the measure of all things, of the things that they are, of the things that are not that they are not. For Plato, this free subjectivity is an illusion. And to Protagoras' man is the measure dictum, the one I just read, Plato responds that God is the measure. But there is also something true in what Protagoras says. Once the assumption that the human is free in the world and its measure is retracted, then the principle and source of that freedom may be seen. There is in this a subordination of oneself to a truth and beauty of which human knowing is not the measure. And in this, aporia or perplexity will play a crucial role. An aporia is an impasse, and it is preliminary to recollection and to the integration of the divided elements in ourselves in relation to a principle which has fallen outside of our view from this standpoint of the beginning. As I have now briefly indicated, the interest of this paper Theocritus does not mean sense perception. He means something more like immediate or first-hand experience. We might say in every case where someone knows something, they perceive directly the objects in question. A mathematician perceives figures and formulas, and a philosopher perceives forms of true reality. And so there's a real sense here, I'm suggesting, in which perception, as a definition of knowledge, is perfectly universal. And in fact, it satisfies Socrates. But it's precisely what makes the definition universal that makes it totally indiscriminate about what counts as knowledge. By emphasizing the need for immediate first-hand experience, the definition has entirely excluded the role of upbringing, culture, of education. In this definition, knowledge is a matter of simple immediacy, and the mediation has entirely fallen out of the picture. Instead of defining the highest form of cognition, the definition Theocritus has given restricts knowledge to the lowest and most abstract way of apprehending what is true or beautiful. But Theocritus doesn't know this. And so that Theocritus might learn this, Socrates the midwife helps bring this first offspring to birth. So the guiding question is this: carrying this child to birth, what follows if not knowledge, but perception, immediate experience, is the unerring and highest standpoint on true reality. The offspring will be born when reality and all forms of knowledge are reduced to the immediacy of appearance. That is, Socrates will now bring into view the most abstract or external way of engaging in reality. In order for appearance to be the highest measure of reality, there cannot exist anything which has authority over it. Nothing may count as a cause or explanation of an appearance which might falsify it. This means that nothing underlies the appearance, that explains why it appears in one way or another. But if nothing underlies the it or the object must be abolished. So that it really sinks in, Socrates repeats this 7 times. Nothing is the same as itself. Nothing is one thing. Nothing is self-identical. And when this reality really settles into the soul, there's no criteria outside of appearance itself that prevents me or you from saying with certainty that everything is just as it appears to me. So it turns out Protagoras was correct, if Theocritus is correct, that the human is the measure of all things. Protagoras quickly becomes the representative and the defender of this view. And his relativism does not just abolish the invisible forms of true reality, it dissolves the individuality of the human, that which makes the human one. What we call a man or a woman, an animal, is just an aggregate, a bundle, without any unity, without any self-identity. There is no longer an inner. So what's left when self-identity is entirely stripped away? We are no longer things that relate to each other as stable objects, but the abolishment of individuality means that only the appearance, a relation between two objects, exists any longer. So we find ourselves in a world of pure relationality, one which corresponds to this total flux. We are nothing in and of ourselves, but exist only in relation and as our immediate experiences. We become so totally identified in the immediacy of appearance that it is all we are. Socrates says, I suppose it remains for us, if we have being, to be for one another, and if we have becoming, to become for one another. For necessity binds our being. Yet we are not bound to something belonging to the others, nor to ourselves. It remains then that we are bound to each other. In this immediacy of appearance, we belong to it and it to us. It is total, and so long as it lasts, there's nothing outside of it. When something appears fearful or beautiful, we so fully are present to that experience, so fully identified in it, that nothing of ourselves is left over. Insofar as appearance is all there is, and underlying reality is stripped away, from one moment to the next, we're a wholly different person. So Theotetus' definition has now come to light as a total standpoint on reality. What we are inwardly has become totally externalized, and we are living outside ourselves. We have found ourselves outside ourselves. There's something two-sided about this immediacy, something deeply compelling about it. The word compelling, as much as captivating or enthralling, capture this double-sidedness. What belongs to experience is, in a highly limited but genuine sense, true for you. What is immediate is inescapably particular. It is a relation situated in a place and a time, and it is thus unique. It is so compelling because it is a total relation to what you know or love. In fact, the immediacy of appearance matches the first speech on eros, or love, that we find in Plato's Symposium. The first of 6 speeches there is delivered by the total and infatuated lover, Phaedrus. He praises Eros for producing heroism and virtue in a way that neither kinship nor public honor nor wealth ever could. That means desire, just like appearance in this earliest form, binds lover and beloved in a total and immediate relation, so that the mediating role of family, education, or the city become entirely secondary. And so the point here is that in the immediacy of knowing or loving, nothing of yourself is left over, because it is a total act of togetherness. You are nothing apart from it. In fact, there's something here that may easily be confused with the object of our greatest hope and longing. We have stripped down knowing to the most abstract form, and we find that it resembles the end. What I'm saying here is that the beginning and the end of the journey, we might say, first-hand, immediate experience, falling head over heels in love, as if we're in high school again, or another situation, I suppose, is intimately connected to the end. Why is that? Because at the beginning and the end, there is nothing of us left over outside of that total togetherness of knower and known, lover and beloved. But the key is that from the beginning to the end, we have 2 inverse ways of being undivided. At the beginning, we're entirely outside ourselves. And what we seek at the end is the complete inverse, a unity of inner and outer, where the logos by which the inner is unified also comprehends us in our total externality, comprehends even the experience from which we begin. And it is only so far as the inner and the outer retain their distinct integrity, their difference, and identity in relation to the good, that this total togetherness is truly known and loved at the end of the journey. Now, I'll say very briefly, there are also looming dangers in this kind of immediacy. We need to step back for a moment to see how these divisions arise. That total togetherness inevitably subsides, revealing what was there unknowingly. So there's a kind of potential darkness to immediacy. Just as that immediacy may give rise to virtue, as Spiders will want to tell us, it can also give rise to its opposite. Just as the immediacy of appearance can be a total conviction about what is real, that conviction can be just as false as true. Now we'll jump to abstraction. In the immediacy of appearance that we just saw, there is something concrete. I mean that it constitutes a real participation in the good, and that's why it's so compelling. Because that participation is total, we are drawn into it and can seek a return to it. But if this is indeed a true participation, what about those powers of memory and intellect and recollection that make us human? We might even ask, where is the soul? It's totally outside itself. Memory, reason, and recollection have fallen out of the picture as if they don't exist. With this, Socrates begins his examination of the new offspring. Now, Socrates examines not Theaetetus, but Protagoras, the sophist, who is made to be its representative. Socrates says, well, if all we are living in the immediacy of appearance, and man is the measure of all things, as you say, Protagoras, how do you have a teacher? How do you claim to be a teacher? Is not pig the measure of all things, or baboon, or any other creature with the capacity for perception? Protagoras' response is abrupt and evasive. On one hand, he wants to maintain the immediacy of appearances. On the other hand, he goes after Socrates, accusing him of demagoguery and using persuasive language. And then comes the most surprising part. Protagoras tells Socrates that he wants to hear demonstration and necessity. Protagoras, the sophist, is asking for demonstration and necessity. The sort, he says, that a mathematician would provide. How can he be making this demand? Protagoras uses a therapeutic model to explain his wisdom and ability. The sophist is like a doctor who through his art brings about a better condition from a worse. Unlike a doctor, the sophist uses words, logoi, to bring about a change in the way things appear. So things appear bad to you, and so you're in a bad condition. The sophist, using his words, makes things appear better and makes it better. This is the hold that Protagoras has on paideia of the present day. It's very difficult to see, I think, how Protagoras can claim to be the measure of all things and to claim that there is no objective reality here. It's particularly difficult because for Plato, being and knowing are connected in this intimate way. But I think this is what's going on. For Protagoras, immediacy and abstract thought have to be kept in two different camps. And so long as they're kept separate, he can jump back and forth between the two, on one hand appealing to immediacy, on the other hand appealing to abstract thought. And so keep himself free. This is the free subjectivity with which Plato in his time is contending. Now, it's important to distinguish two kinds of thinking that may be called abstract. And this, for Plato, reflects a difference between natural philosophers, who are, for him, reductionists, and for him, and no doubt in fact, and the mathematical Pythagoreans. The difference between these two thinkers is that for the natural philosophers, everything is reducible to the organic parts. And he has a great examination of, consideration in a biography he puts in the mouth of Socrates, of how to think about the unity of a substance, of a creature, if all those parts are just reducible, if the human, the animal, is reducible just to these organic components. And so there's this great intimate relation here between natural philosophy, which wants to reduce everything to parts, and Protagoreanism, that wants to reduce all knowledge to appearances. But then on the other hand, we have mathematicians, and they provide us with a way out in the case of Theaetetus, because the mathematicians are treating mathematical objects as having a real existence. And so even though Protagoras is trying to insist that Socrates and Theaetetus use demonstration and necessity, for him, the only necessity that demonstration can provide is the necessity of how it appears, because only appearance is compelling. Necessity is just a function of how things appear. It's only as convincing, even if it's a good proof, as it appears. And so with this division that we've set up between the immediacy of thought and these now two forms of abstract thinking, Plato portrays his divided world, a world that is truly torn between two relations to the good. One, immediate experience, and the other, an abstract thinking which doesn't have hold on life. And so these are two separate worlds, and neither is complete, because each needs something of the other. Now I'm in the final section. Belief. So the opposition between immediacy and abstraction, I hope, has come into view. We see Protagoras safeguarding his relativism by jumping between these two sides. The city is divided between stressed-out pragmatists, ignorant of justice, and detached philosophers who neglect the city, each talking about a different set of objects, a different reality, not communicating between them. And in this context, Plato says there's no end to injustice. There is no one city. There is no unity of the soul in relation from the standpoint of these divided parts. How do we find the unity of the two sides? First, I want to talk about the way forward in relation to that moment when, as a prisoner in the bottom of the cave, someone breaks the chains from the outside, turns you around, and begins dragging you reluctantly up that steep path into the light. As Plato says, this is not a matter of putting sight. That is, education is not a matter of putting sight into blind eyes, but being turned around. And so leaving behind an image thinking, the attachment to appearances, to the content which informs those appearances. It is a matter of recognizing the beliefs and assumptions that are already in us, as well as the real objects that are out there in the world. We've inherited customs, traditions, and religion, comprising a total horizon on reality. And these move us, so long as we remain at the level of appearance, unknowingly. And yet they inform the very things we desire and think we know. More importantly, Plato's directing us to the integrity, not quite in Theaetetus, but another dialogue, the integrity of these customs, traditions, and the religion which accompanies them. There is a deposit of truth in them, in what has been passed down. And in virtue of it, humanity, divinity, and the natural world can find an integral relation. Our divisions can be given an integrity, one which is not totally concrete, but one which allows us to live, we might say, in one level deeper of the division, one level more of a level of life in which these divisions are integrated to one degree further. Belief, of course, is for Plato not a set of doctrines, but a state of the soul. And so it's not something you can readily pick up and put down. We all possess beliefs. They are naturally and readily formed out of experiences, and like patterns stamped on the soul, they quickly come to shape what we expect, what we find surprising, and they provide the regularity to our life. The question here, the matter here, is about moving from those immediate appearances which we oppose to thought to the unity of those two in terms of what's moving us at the level of our inheritance. Now I'm going to move briefly for this conclusion to the dialogue Meno. Now Meno is quite stubborn. His main name means I remain, and he is the student of a sophist Gorgias. Meno initiates a dialogue with Socrates by asking him about virtue. As usual, Socrates wants to know from Meno, who has given so many speeches on the topic, what virtue itself is. And so he wants Meno to stop giving him what virtue appears to him to be, to that underlying reality, which virtue in fact is. Socrates goes on for some time, asking questions and providing models of what a good answer would be. He wants to know what that one reality is which appears in these confusing and incoherent ways. But eventually Meno becomes exasperated, and he admits that he in fact knows nothing at all about the very matter on which he has said so much. He is at a total loss. And in response, he delivers a sophistic puzzle known as Meno's paradox. It puts into question the very possibility of learning. If I already know what I'm looking for, what need is there for searching? If I don't know at all what it is I'm looking for, how will I know when I found it? How will I go looking for it at all? On these terms that Meno presents, knowledge is all or nothing. And Meno, because of Socrates' questioning, has found himself on the side of total ignorance. He has no way forward. We are once again at the aporia. In response, Socrates gives us a myth about recollection, which he says he has heard from the priests and priestesses who have learnt to give an account of their religion. This is the conclusion of that account. Seeing that the whole of nature is akin and the soul has learnt everything, there's nothing to prevent someone who recollects, which people call learning, just one thing, recollect just one thing, from discovering everything else, if he's courageous and doesn't give up searching. For searching and learning are just recollection. So the question here is how the myth of recollection overcomes Meno's paradox and the problem that learning seems impossible. According to the myth, Meno's opinions are not reducible to nothing, but to the extent that there is truth in them, they stand in relation to that true reality present in his memory, which he has only to recollect. So I think we need to see how in this myth, reality is inversed. the movement beyond appearances and opinions we see in this inversion involves a subordination of oneself to a view of true reality that is not entirely within our grasp. We must seek to know ourselves from that standpoint which we do not yet occupy. In relation to that standpoint, our opinions and beliefs are effects. We glimpse in them their higher causes, and through them we recollect that higher world from which we have fallen. And this is what it means to say that belief, what we have inherited in our culture, religion, and tradition, has in it, for Plato, a deposit of truth. Beliefs are acquired through experience, but not reducible to truth. There is truth in them, a reflection of true reality, whose source is the undivided good itself, and which is the passage beyond belief to true knowledge and what is really real. In relation to the good, belief is not reducible to any kind of circular relation with experience. It is not an abstract thinking, but is that first level of concretion of experience and thought, which can lead us towards the good, towards the source and ground of our freedom. So the good does not disappoint because it is the true measure implicit at every stage of our spiritual journey. It directs all things by its providence and is the ground of the truth, beauty, and measure in our lives and in our city. It unfailingly moves us, and no one knowingly turns away from it. The law of our spiritual lives, that what is neglected reasserts itself, is a law of the relation of these oppositions, which we considered just in one form, but which keep reasserting themselves under these deeper forms. They are the engine of the journey, moved by its desire to return to the undivided good. And so, if today experience is our criterion, as Father Krauss suggested some years ago, and if experience is continuing to run its course, perhaps there is need to begin again with Plato and know our dividedness. From there, turning in hope to the undivided good, may we become receptive once again to a true concretion of our divisions, and perhaps discover too the principle and source of that freedom which we take today to be immediately our own. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's about 35 minutes past 8. For those who may not be aware, normally we have paper, sometimes a break, response, and questions. Given that it's the first night, we've had some dinner before this. I think if we need a quick break, how are we feeling, I guess? Or do we want to just roll right into our responder? Oh. Who said something? Started. Quick, let's just take 5 minutes. Give us a chance to refresh a teacup or go to the washroom. We'll regather at 22. think I'll call us back to order. I'll call us back to listen to our responder, who I believe. Thank you, everyone. And carrying on in the great tradition of before Andrew's paper, I'll have Will Barton introduce Andrew's responder.
In 2013, Drew Badgley, who will respond to Andrew Griffin, completed a degree, which has a very long name, International Development Studies Specialist Undergraduate Program, with a major in cultural anthropology at the University of Toronto. Before he took a few years to work for youth serving organizations in Regent Park area of Toronto. He returned to complete a Master's of Theological Studies at Wycliffe in 2018. And this shift for Drew toward theological studies came after encountering classical Anglicanism at St. Bartholomew's Anglican Church in Toronto, the rector of which parish I believe is here with us this evening. Drew has been an active parishioner at St. Bartholomew's since 2015. Tell me if I'm missing any important bits, Drew. In 2022, you were awarded an undergraduate degree from U of T in medieval studies, major in classics, and a minor in philosophy. Drew is now studying at the classics department at Dalhousie University in Halifax, doing an MA. Welcome, Drew.
Before I begin, I'd just like to thank the parish here in Sackville, St. Paul's, for hosting us, for the organizers of this wonderful event, and to Andrew, I'd like to thank you for your paper. It might not be our first instinct to think that a paper so interested in aporia could lead to a conclusion that accords with the theme, hope which does not disappoint. In his account of the argument of the Theaetetus, however, Andrew demonstrates precisely the role of aporia in coming to understand the hope revealed to us in Plato's thought. Aristotle at the beginning of Metaphysics Beta tells us, for those who wish to find a way, being well and truly at a loss is useful. Aporia is useful precisely because we will only be able to recognize the ground of our hope, or why we even need hope at all, when we understand the difficulty from which we hope to be freed, and the kind of impasse that needs to be overcome. Hope, as St. Thomas Aquinas argues, is a movement of the appetitive power ensuing from the apprehension of a future good, difficult but possible to obtain. Should we, in our perception of a good which is not present and already possessed, come to desire it, we may despair of it as unobtainable, or come to hope for it as something difficult but not impossible to obtain. Andrew, in his paper, discussed how Eros binds the lover and the beloved in a total and immediate relation. Hope, as our Eros for the good, begins in immediacy, and immediacy emerges for us first in our perceptions. If, however, we cannot move beyond this initial immediacy to a true understanding of the manner in which the good that we desire is a good for us, we may long for all sorts of things which, while good in themselves, are not good for us to obtain, or at least not in the ways we seek to obtain them. How can we attain knowledge or true opinion as to the good for us is a great difficulty indeed. But there is another problem, namely the problem of whether it is even possible for us to obtain that for which we hope at all. If we consider that which stands in the way of hope an impossibility rather than simply a difficulty, our hope will quickly turn to despair. In our investigation of an aporia, we must discover whether that impasse merely poses a difficulty to our passage, or whether, in fact, it cannot be overcome. We must also recognize that there are two kinds of possible impasses, There arises in man a twofold movement of hope, Aquinas tells us, for a thing may be possible to him in two ways, namely by his own power or by another's. We need not wait to fulfill hopes that are in our power. Those hopes that can only be fulfilled by the power of another, however, require us to await, expectare, that is, to look outwards, to keep our eyes on another. So, in the examination of Plato's thought that we have just heard, what kind of impasse is it to which we have been brought? First, Andrew has insightfully explained to us the aporia of the Theaetetus, that is, the inability to find a logos that can tie together our beliefs and our experience. The dialogue seeks an answer to the question, what is knowledge? But no account can be found that can bind together in thinking the immediacy of sensation and the self-related activity of opinion. We cannot have knowledge of particulars without some higher ground for our thought. The Theaetetus ends with the immediacy of perception and the abstraction of thought never bound together in knowledge. The Theaetetus itself does not provide a way beyond this impasse. If we let ourselves be bound to the view that each dialogue can only be read as a completely self-contained argument, that is, as a perspective that has no reference to any common knowable content beyond itself, then we can go no further. But if, as in the ancient proverb of three blind men investigating an elephant, one touching its trunk, another its ear, another its leg, if there really is an elephant, a reality onto which each of the dialogues offers a perspective, then reading the dialogues as an interrelated collection presents possible ways through which the aporiae of individual dialogues can be passed. By looking not just at the particular perspectives of the Theaetetus, but also taking into account the perspectives given to us in the Phaedrus, in the Republic, and in the Meno, Andrew has done precisely this. He has been able to show to us that immediacy and abstraction can be tied together for Plato discovers a cause of the world that is beyond being, an undivided principle in which all the divisions of being and thought are overcome. Plato's deeper account of being, thinking, and the cause of both, however, does not at first lead us to hope. Rather, we discover beyond the aporia of the Theaetetus an even more fundamental impasse in Plato's thought. Plato, as Andrew has shown us, by overcoming the division between immediacy and abstraction only in the principle, leaves us in a place where divisions are resolved only in the undivided good, so that there is no resolution to this dividedness in the human. Plato then reveals to us a principle in which being and thought are grounded in a prior unity. But what about experience? Our immediate relations to the real world around us. Plato has helped establish that the immediacy of perception inflames our eros for the good, but he leaves us in a world in which we must seek the good beyond the experiences that make us what we are. If we must flee from immediacy to seek some unity in a principle beyond being, how can we, being the sort of creatures we are, really reach to such heights? Andrew has shown us that Plato, for all his manifold gifts to us, cannot explain how our experience can be for us anything other than a kind of compulsion. Our experiences can never be anything more than what they are for us. We cannot know those experiences as determinations of the good for us, since they can only be known in the principle itself. We were not there when God laid the foundations of the earth. Perhaps the philosopher can come to knowledge of what things are in themselves by fleeing from the particular to the universal. This is not hope for those who cannot be philosophers and remain bound by the immediacy of their experience. There is no hope for the human at all if God must remain beyond experience. If the impasse that we face is truly uncrossable, then the desire that we have for a real experience of God can never be fulfilled, and we are left only with despair. Nevertheless, Plato's thought has revealed to us with a great deal of clarity that for which we hope, namely a resolution of our dividedness from the good in the human. We now know much more clearly what we hope for. The questions remain, however, whether it is possible and whether it can be obtained by our strength or only by the power of another. In his paper, Andrew talked about how Plato in the Theaetetus invites us to inhabit Protagoras' position from the inside. We too, year after year, are invited in Advent to inhabit from the inside the position of those who long for God, but do not yet know the way to him. And what is it that we hear in the ordered reading of Scripture that is the traditional lectionary, during that season in which we enter back into our questioning and darkness? The epistle for the first Sunday in Advent, in the more ancient form found in the Sarah Missal before the lesson was lengthened in 1549 for the first BCP, begins the lessons for Advent thus: "And that, knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than when we believed." And on the second Sunday of Advent, St. Paul speaks to us of hope. "Now the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, that ye may abound in hope, the power of the Holy Spirit." And what is the ground of this hope? Namely, that Jesus Christ was a minister of the circumcision for the truth of God, to confirm the promises made unto the fathers. St. Paul declares to us in these lessons that whatsoever things were written aforetime in Scripture were written for our learning. The Scriptures then are filled with promises made unto our forefathers that will be the ground of hope for us who in our Advent condition are still a people sitting in darkness. A complete analysis of the Advent lessons in the traditional lectionary cannot be undertaken here, but the lessons for Advent culminate in the last line of the Gospel for the fourth Sunday in Advent with these words: "Behold the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world." Understanding the standpoint given to us in these lessons is the key to understanding the hope we find in Plato. So what is the content that we are given from within the Advent standpoint of expectation? It is the declaration that our salvation is at hand, and thus our dividedness from God can be overcome. The aporia is great, but not impassable. Thus we can have hope and not despair that the promises written aforetime will be fulfilled. We can attain the experience of the dwelling of God that Aquinas in his commentary on St. John's Gospel tells us we must have. He says, in the mystical sense, Jesus says, "Come and see," because the dwelling of God, whether it is of glory or grace, cannot be known except by experience, for it cannot be explained in words. The true experience of God of which Aquinas speaks, knowing him in his immediacy to us and us in our immediacy to him, is what Plato teaches us to hope for. The revelation throughout all Scripture, without the revelation throughout all Scripture, we could not know that the impasse could be crossed, and there would be naught but despair. It is Plato, however, who explains to us why the impasse cannot be passed by us, but can only be passed if God comes to us. He shows us that we have no power to overcome our dividedness from the good in ourselves, but that it can be overcome in God. The condition for our dividedness from God to be overcome in us, then, is clear. God must enter into the world. The Word made flesh must dwell among us, so that we can see, hear, and touch him. Behold the Lamb of God, which taketh away the sin of the world. Experience of God on the side of man becomes possible through the man, who is perfect God, perfect man, of reasoning soul and human flesh subsisting. Thus, through Plato, we learn what the aporia is. Through Scripture, we have hope that it can be overcome. It takes both standpoints together for us to understand precisely why the impasse is one that we cannot overcome through our own power. We cannot come, we are but men. Thank you, Andrew, for helping us understand, not just when we re-enter Advent, but also in countless moments in which we need hope, that our hope can be deepened with the Old Testament in one hand and Plato in the other. Through Plato, we gain an awareness of the impasse we face in attaining experience of God. And through Scripture, we learn that our salvation is at hand. With both, we learn how better to keep our eyes fixed on Him who must come to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Drew. So this is now a time for questions. We do leave some time, leave some space. I will ask you, if you're going to ask a question, to speak into the microphone. We'll pass it around. This has been beneficial both for online viewers, and it is connected to our speakers, so we can all hear and not have to ask responders to repeat questions.
Thank you. Andrew, I just want, I just wonder if you might be able to clarify something for me, and that is what this kind of dialectical movement in which, the separateness of these moments of immediacy and abstraction are sort of unified at the level of belief. I just sort of want you to clarify a little bit, like, what that means. Like, does it mean that Socrates is saying, you can't hold this position because look at your experience. You act, you live in such a way that this separation isn't possible, or is it working on a different level than what I'm thinking of?
Thank you, Aidan. Yes, that's an excellent question, and we might say, one of the most difficult. There are many forms under which Plato seeks to direct our attention from appearances to beliefs. The two I mentioned, we might say, I'll begin with just touching on the first one being Meno, where essential to the move beyond this attachment to appearances is that that discovery that outside of the relation of their relation to, let's say, the light in which they are known, they're reducible to nothing. Because appearances, like opinions, have this dual side. On one hand, they arise out of experience, and in that respect, they can seem reducible to it. They can seem like nothing. And so that on that one hand, they arise out of experience. On the other hand, as they're arising out of experience, they're also being, you might say, they're also simultaneously originating from the principle, from the higher. And that's the respect in which they have that deposit of truth. And so the question is, how do we move from holding these appearances, sort of under one view to the other? And so in Meno, that takes the form of this aporia, this experience that what you know is actually total ignorance. I actually know nothing at all. And then, with this new understanding of recollection, you say, wait, actually, what I thought was total ignorance actually does carry that relation to the principle, does actually carry relation to the knowledge. And so you realize that it's not just the reductionism side, but the fact that they're also they're emerging simultaneously from experience and from the principle. It's more difficult with Protagoras. There's a way that there's a way that Protagoras is convinced, insofar as he is drawn out of appearances slightly differently. Because I think for Plato, one who earnestly and devotedly clings to those appearances can't be drawn out of them. But insofar as his standpoint is walked into beliefs, it's by tying down, we might say, the side of experience to the side of thought. Rather than saying that thought is derivative of what appears, you say, oh, the way it appears is actually derivative of thought. And so you totally inverse the priority. And so that's the basic logic of the move, I think. Yeah.
Thank you for the paper and the response, and I'd actually like to ask a question of each of you, but Andrew, just this question about hope in Plato, it seems to me one way that there are different levels, and there seems to me to be what your paper was arguing, if I understood it, is that despair and hope are two sides of the same thing. And that's what it means to talk about an impasse or an aporia. The impasse in and of itself is kind of a moment of despair when you're actually discovering that what you thought you knew, you don't know. But what turns that into hope is the recognition that there's a resolution at a higher level. You know, this is this sense in which hope is in relationship to the good that is not simply present, right? And it seems to me that at the level, is that what you're saying? You know, so in a way, the whole line, the whole movement of Plato's thought is a movement of despair transformed into hope, grounded ultimately in this recollection of a principle in which we will not be disappointed. Is that?
That was beautifully put. Yes, thank you. I think that's exactly right, that the despair is the flip side of the hope. And the reason it takes this form, I think, is because of what I was saying in response to Aidan. The way that the principle, like our beginning is in the good, but we're starting fallen from it, and so the good is, and so as we, so to speak, advance into, come into life and love, there's a respect in which what we've come into and the beliefs we've come to hold are entirely reducible to nothing, and then there's a respect in which they have that origin in knowledge, and so yeah, I think you're bringing out the next step of that, which is that the despair is that sort of sort of turning point at which we flip from seeing them as reducible to seeing them as belonging to a higher reality, as if falling from a higher reality. And so then the flip of that perspective, according to which then we see them as derivative of something higher than us, is at once the hope. And I think in relation to the levels, it only dawned on me yesterday that what we're dealing with here is, and this relates to Krauss's comment, I think, is from the exterior to the interior with belief, and then to the superior. Like, there is a real sense that appearances to belief is like one level of that despair and hope, and then from belief to the good is another level of that despair and hope together, where the level of mathematical thinking or dianoia is it's that in a sense it's an abstract relation to to that knowledge. And so it kind of falls out of the picture there. But thank you. That was an excellent, question. Helpful. Christelle, please.
Yeah, thanks. Oh, yeah, it's working. Thanks, Andrew. I very much appreciated your paper, and particularly at the end where you sort of tried to relate this to our contemporary situation. And you talked about sort of the centrality of experience, individual experience, and I certainly see that within the world today. I do also at the same time see the flip side, which is this abstracted, very theoretical view of the world, reducing everything to theory. And this is very much sort of the model that today's natural philosophers, the scientific community, the scientific, might say, intelligentsia. So we've got this one very almost bloodless, abstract way of looking at the cosmos. And then we're seeing at the same time these sort of more populist movements, sometimes driven by the same sort of demagogues that Plato and Socrates themselves warned about, which very much emphasize a sort of immediate experience, almost an intuitive sort of experience, and quote-unquote common sense view of the world, over and against this sort of abstracted, theoretical, scientific view. So it seems that we're living in this same sort of brokenness that characterized Plato's and Socrates' own time, and I'm wondering sort of what hope you see, if any. I mean, I should hope that there's hope, but I'm wondering, what hope do you see for moving beyond this and perhaps reconciling these opposing forces that we can, as you've laid out, that we can see today? Yeah.
Thank you, Christelle, for your impossible question. That's just the kind of question I like to talk about. And but it falls outside of my knowledge, though the point I was trying to bring out in the introduction there was that today, whenever somebody goes to read Plato, they'll, I don't want to overstate that, but I mean, there is a real way that we bring to Plato our own assumption of a concrete humanity. That is to say, the very oppositions Plato is seeing in the human, like we're divided between life and thought. If we go to Plato and see those as just, oh, that's not a problem, that's just two sides of the same thing, then we've brought our concrete humanity to Plato. And so I think that's our situation today, is that we've passed through all these stages of history, which we will see over the next few days, I'm sure, being worked out. And so I do tend to think, and this is just following James Dowell, that because of this new understanding of our subjective freedom, there's a sense that we can be at home more fully in these oppositions than Plato can be. That is, we can be at home in this immediacy and sort of find ourselves there, or in this abstraction, find ourselves there more freely. But so I guess what I'm suggesting is that to begin again with Plato means to retract the idea that that these divisions aren't real. That these aren't real divisions. But to actually see, to really take into ourselves a sense that these are true divisions, which is not within our power as humans to overcome. And once we see them as true divisions, then we can, I think, interpret Plato rightly, and then also maybe sort of become open to the mutual implication and necessity of these sides, these opposed sides, and look for a principle beyond them that can find the integrity that the different sides are seeking. So.
Do we need to have a moment of aporia, is what you're saying, before we can really acknowledge, start by really acknowledging the problem of the situation we're in?
Well, I do wonder whether the moment of aporia is what Krauss in that article is referring to as a bitter and devastating experience, though in another context. And so I think in a certain sense, perhaps, but that's for others to say more about. I'd be interested in knowing those who know Krauss more fully on this, and I think Neil will give us will probably answer the question at the end of the week. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a question, Drew, about your comment regarding having the Old Testament in one hand and Plato in the other. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me from the papers tonight that we're sort of stuck between this markedly individualist view of okay, I experience a given thing a given way, so therefore everybody else must also, versus this, I think Chris, I used the word bloodless, this totally analytic, non-subjective framework that alienates anybody who actually has a working brain. But it seems to me that the Old Testament sort of exists in a weird third space where it tells the story of a group of people, a nation, a tribe, who exist together in this collective framework of having seen and known God, and then passing that down to their descendants. So what gives?
What gives? I think the point which I was trying to draw out with that is that if we take Plato in his fullness, as Neil was just saying, that we have these aporia and its experiences despair, but the hope is you're able to move a level up. But eventually you get all the way up to the top. And it might be the case that everything is contained in the principle beyond being, but what about our immediacy here below? And since we, through Plato, learn the nature of the divide, that it is such that we cannot go to God, or we can't have that experience of God here on the side of the human. We can only have the resolution of this immediacy in the principle. Then we need God to come to us. And so why I reference the Old Testament is because this is the beginning of the history of God revealing himself in history. So at a particular moment, featured in my response, is of course the incarnation. But it doesn't begin at the incarnation. That God does not start crossing the divide to be present to us at the incarnation. He begins at the very beginning of Scripture. So that's why the Old Testament has to be in one hand. Yeah.
Thank you both for your papers, and thanks everyone for your questions. Andrew, this distinction between immediacy on the one hand, or opposition rather, immediacy on the one hand, abstraction on the other, I've never considered that before, and I'm finding it really helpful. And what really stood out to me in your paper is the way you talked about the sophist, who can occupy both spheres but has to kind of keep them apart. And I'm thinking about my life as someone who, has been studying the humanities for what feels like most of my life, and it's totally useless, right? Like what good is what good is this? Oh my goodness! And there's this great temptation to try to make what probably for most would seem like abstract knowledge practical. For instance, my education has given me the power of persuasion, right? Like the use of logoi to transform people's immediate experiences, to change people's feelings and passions, right? This is what rhetoric is for. So yeah, I feel like I'm having a kind of an enriched appreciation for what the sophist is and does, as one who has to keep these things apart, because if what is abstract and theoretical on the one hand isn't separate from what is immediately apparent on the other, then it can't be made useful to transform what is abstract and theoretical can't be made useful, can't be used as a tool. So that, I'm finding that very helpful. But then you brought in Plato's Meno and the doctrine of recollection, because my next question would normally be like, okay, oh my goodness, I want a taste of that unity, right? Like I want to get beyond the opposition. I want that so bad. But when you bring in recollection, it's almost like we have this reminder now that, no, actually, the unity beyond the difference is prior to the difference that the sophist is trying to maintain. So anyways, that was a long preamble to my question, which is, what does the sophist have to do to stay a sophist? Like, what is at work in that kind of like, no, experience, or what is immediate and what is abstract, we're going to keep these separate so that I can keep going around shilling arguments and changing people's minds for money. So if I'm a sophist, what am I doing to stay that way rather than the prior unity beyond this opposition kind of drawing me to itself?
Thank you, Matthew. Excellent question. Beautifully put. In relation to where you began, I would say the capacity to jump back and forth between experience and abstract thought, I think, is our predicament today, our sort of common form today, and it can be very difficult to overcome that impasse. And it is more difficult for us today than in Plato's time, in a certain respect, I believe. And that is to say, the sophist, for Plato, is implicitly Platonic. He's implicitly a philosopher. And that's the sense in which he has an appearance is a concrete thing. And so for him, abstract thought is a function of, or a derivation of, it's derivative of the appearance, and so it actually has a merely shadow existence. When we turn to the Hellenistic world, something we might get that it's more akin to today, there is a new form of individuality which can sort of hold itself over and against the world in a way that Plato can't, in a way that even the sophist can't, you might say. Even the sophist apprehends something, an appearance that is real. And so I think the possibility of maintaining abstractions, maintaining this division of immediacy and abstraction is greater for us today, but for the sophist, what it depends upon is not permitting in any degree the existence of something that can be the measure of the appearance. And so there is absolutely nothing you can bring to me of which I am not the measure. If there's something underlying the appearance, then I can't be its measure. If there's anything that can appear in two different ways, you might say, I can't be its measure, because the measure is that underlying thing that appears in two different ways rather than the appearance. If justice is, then the way it appears to us is just a subordinate moment. Whereas for the sophist, the appearance has to be, immediacy has to be the moment that has priority over the thinking. And that's what sustains the position. Is that? Yes. Thank you for your question.
I'm just going to ask a really niggling, annoying question of Andrew. No, sorry, not Andrew, of Drew. Of Drew. Yes, sorry, of Drew. So thank you for your comments, and I loved this way about speaking about aporia impasses, which then took us to the question about the impasse of the human and the divine that seems to be present in the ancient world. And here's my niggly bit. It looks then as if the incarnation is a resolution to a problem in thought. And from that point of view, if you are a Platonist, let's say you're Porphyry, and you're looking at Christianity, you go, that solves all my problems. Except he didn't. So this is where I wonder whether, because again, the question is it just a problem in thought that, okay, we can't solve it humanly, so God's going to have to solve it.
Right.
But there's a way in which, you don't have a revelation in quite the sense that Christianity speaks of it as simply the resolution of a problem in thought. And that there's, could you just tease that out a little bit more?
Oh, I think so. I hope so. We'll find out, won't we? I think due to the limitedness of a response, as opposed to kind of giving a paper where I could spell these things all out, I feel like I could only nod to some of these things. But I think my response to Jonah just now is the beginning of what I would think about as a response to that, is that this is a revelation that is moving in history itself. And so it has various moments. So it has everything that leads up to the incarnation, the whole of the Old Testament has the incarnation, and then it continues through the whole rest of the history of the church where new questions are arising for thought that have to be resolved, and for the very manner of human living that have to be worked out as we figure out how to live in the world as Christians. And if anybody's interested in reading about the history of Christian institutions, James Dowell, highly recommend. But I think that I simply could defer to other people who have thought about that more to kind of give a more full account of it. But at this moment, yeah. It is set up as a resolution. The way that my response is set it up, it is as a resolution to thought, but it certainly is a nod to it being much bigger than that. Yeah.
Could I jump in on that one?
Yeah?
Sorry, that's it. If I may, just very briefly, perhaps I'm missing the force of the question. But I mean, if you're using thought as opposed to life in this sense, then that would be a problem. If the resolution is on the side of thought and not also on the side of life. And I think, I mean, what neither of us could get into properly would be to start the question from the other side, not from appearance, but from knowledge, and ask more precisely, what is Plato seeking as that highest knowledge, that philosophical knowledge? And if we can put it again in terms of love or knowing, Dennis House so frequently put it in terms of love, so I'll put it in terms of knowing, and these are the proceedings I'm talking about. But I think what it would be is that the total integration of these divided elements of life and thought would be, if I understand this rightly, a logos or an account of the form, we might say, of the principle in which what is external, it's outer, external, or the side of life, is comprehended in that principle, and nothing other than that logos, which is also totally internal to the principle. And so I think there's a real way that it would be that life and thought would maintain their difference, and yet thought would comprehend life without in any way neglecting its integrity as life. Yeah, I guess. And so that's what would be needed, I think. Yeah. So.
Unless there's any other, maybe one last burning question, it is 9:30, so it might be a good place to leave it off for the evening. Just as a reminder, for tomorrow, 8 a.m. Matins here at St. Paul's Church, and 10 a.m. is our next paper, Old Testament with Dr. Daniel Driver, and a response by Dr. Patricia Robertson. So thank you all for being here the first night. A lovely evening, and we look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. Thank you.